Hello, I'm Mishka Balsam, host of GNCC's 2020 Niagara Economic Summit series, and welcome to this, our final session, where we draw on experts from around the country and region to assess where we are right now, where we can go from here, and how we can get there. Let us acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee people. We recognize and deeply appreciate their historic connection to this land. We also recognize the contributions of Métis, Inuit, and Indigenous people, both in shaping and strengthening our region in particular, and our province and country as a whole. The past two sessions looked at the economic picture globally and domestically, and the forces that will shape our recovery, along with the opportunities for smart and sustainable regrowth that benefit the entire community, everything from affordable housing to transportation. Today's dialogue is taking an in-depth look at tourism and cross-border trade, two sectors that have been the pillars of our economy. How can we speed up their recovery and ensure their future growth? The basic format is that of a dialogue. Are governments and businesses up for the challenges of successive waves of this pandemic? How will this economic recovery play out? And what are the risks to specific sectors regionally, nationally, and globally? For the next hour and a half, this interactive video conversation is examining the economic impact on our lives and how we can overcome the daunting challenges. This series is presented in partnership with Niagara Region Economic Development, Goodman School of Business, Brock University, Niagara College, DDL and Company, RBC, Deloitte, BDC, Niagara Workforce Planning Board, Pegasus Aviation, Easy Rock 105.7, and Newstalk 610 CKTB. Thank you for all that you do for the community. It is now my pleasure to introduce sponsor welcome from Niagara College.
Hello, I'm Sean Kennedy, President of Niagara College, and it's my pleasure to bring you virtual greetings on behalf of all of us at Niagara College. The Niagara Economic Summit plays such a critical role in facilitating the important discussions that move our community forward, and I'd like to thank the Greater Niagara Chamber of Commerce for ensuring that this Summit Series continues in these exceptional times. It is more important than ever that we work together to harness the passion, innovation, and resilience of Niagara's business, educational, and community leaders. I know that all of us have worked hard to meet the unique challenges of COVID-19 in our professional and personal lives. At Niagara College, we've had to adapt and make difficult short-term changes to our operations, but we also know that our community depends on us and that we will play a significant role in the economic recovery that will follow. We've taken great care to preserve and enhance our ability to support businesses in Niagara and beyond for the better days that lie ahead. We will continue to drive growth and innovation in our communities through highly skilled graduates and access to expertise and applied research activities that give our sectors a competitive advantage. I'm especially pleased that this week the summit will focus on Niagara's tourism industry, which is such an important spoke in Niagara's economic wheel and home to many accomplished Niagara College graduates. Niagara College is here to support our region's renowned tourism industry as it identifies strategies to adapt and persevere through the challenges of today to re-emerge and flourish in a post-COVID world. Thank you for lending your time and perspectives to these important sessions, and best wishes for a fruitful and constructive discussion.
It's now my pleasure to introduce to you the moderator for today's dialogue. Janice Thompson is President and CEO of the Niagara Falls Tourism Organization. She was previously the President and CEO of the Niagara on the Lake Chamber of Commerce, Chair of the Niagara Parks Commission, and Chair of the Niagara Falls Bridge Commission. Before moving this dialogue over to Janice, here's a welcome message from Deloitte.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Linda Blair, and I'm the Managing Partner of Ontario and the Chief Experience Officer at Deloitte Canada. I am thrilled to be with you here this morning. 2020 has proven to be an extraordinary year. As Canada and the rest of the world look to rebuild after the pandemic, We recognize how important it is for businesses to build a more resilient and thriving future for themselves and for our country. But let's talk about you, Niagara. With more than 40,000 businesses, your proximity to the GTA and the US market, and being a designated foreign trade zone, Niagara is in a privileged position for growth and development. This is a very important factor in Ontario's economic recovery. At Deloitte, we are pleased to work with many leaders in your community, uncovering new opportunities and being a part of their growth journeys. Beyond the traditional day-to-day accounting and tax work, we serve our clients locally through a variety of transactions, such as mergers and acquisitions, both on the buy and sell side, helping businesses go public with their finance transformation, IT integration, compensation planning, to just name a few. If you would like to have further discussions with our leaders, I encourage you to reach out to our local leaders, Pam Lilly, John Billhauer, Andrew Skeldon, and Catherine Parsons-Demija, all of which are based in the 905 corridor and dedicated to serving you and the business community. Now, before we move on with today's exciting program, let me ask you something. How many of you were glued to your television or social media watching the US presidential election results? Wasn't it nerve-wracking? Like many of you, I was so eager to find out the outcome so I could understand the impacts it will have on us here in Canada. As we reflect on our future, the opportunities ahead, and the impact of the changing global geopolitical landscape on Canada and Canadian businesses, there is no one better suited to help us all make sense of the trends and how we can plan for the unexpected than the Honourable Pierre Pettigrew. Pierre is a former Member of Parliament and Federal Cabinet Minister, and as you likely know, he led the well-regarded International Policy Review that provided the Government of Canada with a fully integrated approach of diplomacy, defence, trade, and development in international affairs. We are so honoured that Pierre is part of our Deloitte family as an executive advisor. So on that note, please join me in welcoming the Honourable Pierre Pettigrew.
For joining us here at the Niagara Economic Summit, and we're live from White Oaks Conference Resort and Spa. You're all joining us virtually, and we're very grateful for that level of participation. The hotel here at White Oaks, they have got this phenomenal setup for all the businesses. Should really check with their local hotels and conference facilities and see how everyone has moved along to embrace the new technology and the new ways of delivering business. So this morning we're going to begin with our guest speaker. We're very happy to have the Honourable Pierre Pettigrew. He is with us this morning, and he is the Executive Advisor International to Deloitte Canada. He's also Chair of the Board at the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada and the Government of Canada's Special Envoy for the Canada-European Union Trade Agreement. Pierre served as Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister for International Trade, and Minister for International Cooperation in successive federal cabinets, and he led trade missions to Algeria, China, Germany, India, Mexico, Morocco, Nigeria, Russia, and South Africa, among others. He is the author of The New Politics of Confidence and was educated at the University of Quebec and the University of Oxford. Welcome this morning, Pierre.
Thank you so much, Janice. Very kind introduction. Delighted to be with you to talk about the environment in which we now have to run our businesses and manage our lives as well as we can. And I would like to begin by telling you that honestly, the pandemic is a seismic event in international relations. And like all seismic events, you can expect it to profoundly alter the international order to which we have become accustomed in the last few years. A pandemic like this, a seismic event, I mean, almost like a world war, inevitably alters the relationship between countries, makes some countries stronger, some other countries weaker, alters the alliances between countries, and that will affect trade to a very significant degree. So let me put it as I see it at this time. I believe fundamentally that this pandemic will accelerate history, and it will deepen some trends that we have seen emerging in the last 10, 15 years. And those trends, first of all, will be around the role of the government in our society. We have seen in the last few months governments assuming huge roles, not only towards us as individuals, telling us how to live our lives, who we can meet, even within our own families, how we can work. It has affected businesses and to a very large extent, and therefore governments are really, really back in our lives in a very important way. So I think this is one of the features that I will develop in the next few minutes. It's the role of the government and the relationship we have to expect from the governments in the lives of our companies and of ourselves. So the pandemic will alter international relationships to a very significant degree. These relationships, as I say, we had already seen some trends, but these will be deepened and accelerated again. And what are the most important ones of them? We've been running our companies for the past 40 years in an era of globalization, an Anglo-Saxon market globalization. One, that started with Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, and followed by everyone else, like, Bill Clinton and Tony Blair and all that. And that era was one where we minimized the role of the government as much as we could. We shrank the role of the state, and globalization determined that markets allocated resources a lot better. So we lived, towards free trade, towards open markets, deregulation. It was liberalization of trade, deregulation, privatization. So the markets were to allocate resources better. And that's how we were running our companies. This pandemic, in my view, is the third body blow to globalization. It had already begun to slow down globalization before the pandemic because of the first two body blow to globalization. The first one was the financial crisis in 2008, where many, many citizens in the United Kingdom, in Great Britain, and around the world were very frustrated by the financial institutions. Many lost their homes over it, not able to pay their mortgages. Therefore, many individuals were saying, well, where is the government? Where are these regulations that could have protected me? And our market's really all that good to allocate resources better. So you began to see around the financial crisis a number of citizens saying, where is the government and the regulations? The second body blow to globalization took place with the two shocks of 2016. When the United Kingdom, Britain, of all countries, the country of Margaret Thatcher, who had started the movement of globalization, decided to leave through Brexit. The Brexit decision was another blow to globalization in that Britain was choosing to leave the single European market that they had negotiated very, very hard in the 80s. So they were leaving the largest single free market and open market in the world in favor of some nationalism, sovereignty back to London, take the power from Brussels and give them to Westminster. This was bringing back politics over the economy that ran for decades. And then in November, in the same order, Thatcher and then Reagan arrived in 79 and 80. And then in 16, Britain chose Brexit and Americans chose Trump in November. You will remember that Trump had supported Brexit, and he arrived breaking a bipartisan consensus of 70 years in the United States, running as an isolationist, as an anti-globalization, saying that globalization had been bad for the United States, running against free trade that he's never liked. He criticized the Japanese auto cars that were imported in the US in the 80s. So this was bringing back politics over the economy again. And Donald Trump did that very, very much throughout his 4 years in office, where through executive orders and tweets, he dictated the trade policy of the United States. The whole confrontation of China, tariffs, transactional tariffs without World Trade Organization and multilateralism, he ran against that as well. So this was the second blow to globalization, because Trump and Brexit brought politics back to the forefront. Politics mattered more than the economy. And now, as I say, the third body blow to globalization is this global sanitary crisis, and the resurgence of the role of the government in societies that are borrowing a lot of money that we will have to deal with, but trying to save businesses and allow families to go through. But that's a seismic event. I would say on that front that the two superpowers that are rivals for leading, if you want, or around the world, certainly in terms of trade, but strategically as well, both the United States and China lost steam during the pandemic. Both countries lost a lot of credibility in terms of global leadership. Americans, because they did not offer any global leadership, contrarily to what they had done for Ebola, HIV, H1N1, all of these, and made such a very, very difficult management of their own pandemic in their own country. So they lost a lot of credibility around the world. Many people, their former allies who received tariffs and this and that, have lost sort of confidence. It will be to the United States to determine whether it can recuperate that. But in China too, lost a lot of ground during this pandemic. Many people suspect that it was not very transparent when the virus first appeared, did not really share the news on time so that other countries could protect themselves and try to hide it. And during the pandemic, they've used the fact that people were distracted far more to bully people around, and therefore are not, really assuming a lot of global leadership on a number of issues. What I'd like to call your attention on is that China's influence in the last 10 years has changed. We reintegrated China in the world order. They became members of the World Trade Organization. I'm actually the Canadian trade minister who signed the Canada-China WTO accession treaty. And at that time, China had committed to a number of economic reforms to respect the rules of the WTO, which they did. The first 10 years, the Chinese really did the economic reforms they committed to. But since President Xi, who is very much of a nationalist, like Trump, very much is someone who believes in the communist regime superiority, he's really trying to make communism, state capitalism work, and demonstrating that market capitalism, the Anglo-Saxon way, is not nearly as good as their state capitalism, and this is what he's promoting. He's really trying to bring some Communist Party discipline in the private sector element of this. So the globalization in which he is not the Anglo-Saxon market capitalism, but it really is a kind of Chinese state globalization where governments will run the show far more than markets. Now, let me look into the most important element of 2020 beyond the pandemic, of course, which is still raging and which is really not resolved. It will monopolize our attention. We have some light at the end of the tunnel with the 3 vaccines now that are very promising, seem to be very effective. So that's very good news, but we still have a few very harsh months in face of us. how will the other big element of 2020, of course, is the American election that took place last, 3 weeks ago already. President Trump seems to begin to understand that he's lost and has allowed the beginning of the transition to take place. Let me look into that, because this is, with the trends that I've been describing and the trends of the last 15, 20 years, will they be reversed with Joe Biden's election? First, this was a very consequential election because you could not have more opposed candidates, both not only in terms of style and tone, but in terms of policies and substance and the kind of values that they have in politics that they want. The U.S. election, and I want to call your attention on it, was much more competitive than we thought. Joe Biden won squarely the Electoral College. He won the popular vote by 6 million more votes. That is quite significant, but Trump was more competitive. He got almost 74 million votes. That is 10 million more votes than he got in 2016. And that means that he will continue to be a huge force globally in the United States, but within the Republican Party. Further, the Democrats did not do well in the House. The Democrats won the presidency, Biden 80 million votes, a historical high, but the Democrats lost probably about 10 seats in the House and may not gain the majority in the Senate. The 2 Georgia seats, it is thought, will stay Republicans, which means that we will have divided government. So with the Republican Party that will continue to be dominated by Donald Trump, I mean, he'll probably go to Mar-a-Lago, but it will be, kiss my ring and I'll support you in a primary. The Republican Party will not go back to its traditional grand old party's value of internationalism or open markets and free trade. He will continue to insist that the Republicans who want to succeed down the line have to espouse his view. And there's no one within the Republican Party who seems to be able to have a counterweight. Now, Biden is an absolute centrist. He has deep experience in foreign affairs. He was, as you know, chairman of the Senate Committee on Foreign Affairs. He's very professional of governance. He likes public service, and he's appointing the people. He's appointing our utmost professionals, and all from the center. But the Democrats have moved left, and it will be challenging for him to move anything to satisfy them. It will be stopped at the Senate in some kind of way. But do expect, as far as the international order is concerned, that Biden will go back to some kind of internationalism, some kind of multilateralism. He's already committed to bring the U.S. back in the Paris Climate Accord, back to the World Health Organization. He wants to reinvigorate the World Trade Organization and the dispute settlement body that has become ineffective while Trump was boycotting it. So we, for Canada, will be far more comfortable because as a mid-sized countries, and we're not bullies, we're Canadians, we're so polite, we're so courteous, we don't, we're not too much into name calling. So having the rule of law, multilateralism, WTO is a blessing for Canada. Now, on the confrontation of China, whereas Trump went one-on-one, on a transactional basis, Biden will realize that he has to confront China, but I think he will do it in a multilateral way. He will do it by rebuilding the alliances. He's experienced of those things, and he knows that if the European Union supports the American positions of China, if Japan supports, if Canada is on side, if you have a number of countries, there are far more chances that you can extract concessions from China. China needs the world economy. China needs to have economic growth and cannot have it if the world economy is not functioning well. So my view is that whereas many people thought globalization was over, I think it will not be the heyday that it was, but I believe that when people realize how damaged are our economies post-pandemic, few people will want to enter into a containment of China, or when I hear people say a Cold War. You could have a Cold War with Russia because there was no trade between the United States and Russia when the Berlin Wall fell, $2 billion a year. But we have integrated China deeply in the world economy, and the US trade $2 billion a day. So you may have some decoupling in technology, you can have some decoupling in pharmaceutical or some equipment, but the world economy will be so damaged that people will realize that you still need some kind of globalization that make it dynamic and functioning. Let me just conclude on this because I've already spoken too long. Canada seems to be very well positioned because even if protectionism is on the rise around the world, in Europe, in Asia, and all over the place, we are the only G7 country that has a free trade access to every other G7 economy through the CETA, Canada-European Union Trade Agreement, that we just signed last week. The federal government signed it last week with Britain leaving. We have it with the United States through our Canada-US-Mexico agreement, and we're members of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, giving us access to Japan. So I think the name of the game will be as good as it can be in terms of market access abroad, but we can expect to live in terms of turbulence and some kind of rise of protectionism that will not disappear with Biden and the Democrats, even though it will be more civil and easier to dialogue. So I will stop here, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Pierre, for your wonderful insights. We appreciate it very much. We're very fortunate to hear that from you today. And we're hoping that with this panel that we have in place this morning, that we're going to be able to explore Niagara's opportunities and how we can seize them. But you've pointed out, of course, this pandemic has created such a huge setback across the entire world that perhaps we first need to talk about what has been lost and how we can recover it before we set our sights on growth. But I'd like to start by introducing our panel members this morning. We're joined by Anthony Nunziata. Anthony is president of the Tourism Partnership of Niagara. He has more than 2 decades of experience in the tourism industry. He served as Vice President of Marketing for Canadian Niagara Hotels, Vice President of Marketing for Hilton Hotel and Suites, and Executive Director of Marketing for Niagara Falls Casino Resort and Casino Niagara. Welcome, Anthony.
Thank you.
We're also joined by Dottie Gallagher, and Dottie is one of the directors of the Great Lakes Metro Chambers Coalition and president and CEO of the Buffalo Niagara Partnership. And that's the Buffalo area's regional chamber of commerce and economic development organization. Dottie previously served as president and CEO of Visit Buffalo Niagara, the Regional Tourism Promotion Bureau, and as a member of the executive management team at the Buffalo News. Welcome, Dottie.
Thank you.
We're also joined by Dan Paskowski. Dan Paskowski is the president and the CEO of Wine Growers Canada. The wineries that he represents produce more than 90% of the country's wine. Prior to his joining Wine Growers Canada, originally the Canadian Vintners Association, in 2006, Dan served as Vice President of Economic Affairs for the Mining Association of Canada and as Senior Policy Advisor of Mining and Forestry for the Ministry of Natural Resources. Good morning, Dan. So I think we can all see that we have quite a diverse panel here this morning, and taking the background comments kindly provided by Pierre, we have a good format to proceed with our questions. And I'd like to begin by addressing a question, please, to Anthony. Anthony, we've heard some of the devastating stories about the impact of the pandemic, specifically on Niagara tourism. Perhaps you could quantify this impact for us. What does it mean for our region's economy? And when would you expect our sector to bounce back? And what would help it to do so?
Well, thanks, Janice. I think, the economic impacts that affect Niagara as a result of the pandemic are well documented. We're in a $2.5 billion a year industry or sector here in Niagara. And the big impacts, obviously, come from the fact that the border and the access from the United States has now been shut off. The airport, which is the largest international port of arrivals in North America through Pearson, has been, for the most part, cut off to Niagara. And the largest urban center in which we get a lot of our customers is in the red in terms of the greater Toronto area. So when you look at the impacts of all these areas and all the disconnect from those markets, you can see that there's been a significant impact to Niagara. Now, Niagara is a pretty resilient market in terms of its capabilities and what it has to offer. So in terms of its positioning in the marketplace and how it will move forward, it is positioned well. We were coming off, as you know, record years in 17, 18, 19, and probably heading for a record year in 20 had we not been affected by the global pandemic. The structural components exist here. Quite frankly, the issues that are in front of us now really rely on the fact that confidence within the marketplace, safety, and community acceptance of visitation into our jurisdiction are all barriers right now. Obviously, the vaccine that's been touted by the three different pharma companies that are saying they've had great success will have, I think, a material impact on confidence and consumer acceptance in terms of welcoming people back, and perhaps, having the conversation that the borders may once again open up once the vaccines are in marketplace. 40% of Niagara's business relies on an open border. So it's significant that border be part of the solution going forward. As a gateway to international arrivals, we positioned ourselves against the Toronto market with offering the wine and culinary components that Niagara is so known for. And when you combine that with the largest port of international arrivals through Pearson, we are well positioned as a destination within North America to do that. I think, as we talk about the role of government, I love those comments that by the Honorable Pierre Pettigrew in terms of the role of government. Never in our lifetimes, or at least my lifetime, have I seen a bigger role of government and the role of which government is playing in terms of whether they impose health restrictions, economic restrictions, or economic recovery. So the role of government is going to be very important in terms of how we move forward and how we look at policies that allow the private sector to actually lead some of those recoveries and not be so dependent on government. So I think Niagara is a pretty entrepreneurial jurisdiction as it relates to those components. It's been pretty resilient, and I think the opportunity for it to bounce back is fairly strong. Timing for that, obviously, we're optimistic that we can be getting closer to normal by next summer. Certainly not from an international perspective, but certainly from a domestic perspective.
Great, thank you for that. For those that are joining us by the live stream, please feel free to use the chat button at the bottom of the screen and submit your comments or questions as you hear the panelists address these interesting questions. I'd like to put the next question, please, to Dan. And Dan, it has often been said that the beverage alcohol industry is in fact immune to recessions. But we've seen signs now that this might not be the case. Can you answer that question for us now? And if the wine industry is indeed not recession-proof, what has been the impact of the pandemic on it?
Thank you for the question. I guess I would disagree that the wine industry is not recession-proof. More likely, it is recession-resistant or pandemic resistant for that matter, because Canadians will still enjoy wine in good and in difficult times. They don't stop drinking. What we have seen though is cancellation in drinking occasions, whether that be weddings or whether that be conferences. And again, it goes back to Pierre Pettigrew's comments about the role of government. I think wineries like museums and others watch almost daily to the premiers of their respective provinces to see what the changes are going to be. Are we going from orange to red or back to yellow? But closed restaurants and bars, decline in tourism, decline in winery cellar door sales and visits definitely have had significant impacts on the industry. We have seen the total spend on wine has definitely decreased as people have not been spending on what could be viewed as a luxury product. And in the case of Niagara and British Columbia and Nova Scotia, our VQA and our other premium wines that we produce have been impacted by the pandemic, as people some may decide to have a great luxury bottle of wine while they stay home and watch a movie on a Friday night. But what we typically have seen is that there's been a trading down to lower value imports or domestic wines, or wines that are being lower value but in larger format containers. So people don't want to be lining up at a retail store to purchase their wines. So that definitely has had an impact. In terms of the pandemic itself, and I'll just kind of read out a couple of statistics to give you a little bit of flavor as to what the impact has been in Ontario specifically, where we've seen most recent surveys, 60 to 80% of wineries are reporting a decrease in sales and for that matter, revenue. 79% decrease in exports. Interestingly, a 71% increase in direct-to-consumer delivery within the province of Ontario. So Ontarians are familiarizing themselves with e-commerce in a way that they haven't done in the past. They feel safer purchasing online now than having to go to a retail store and make that purchase. So that is a positive development. And 80% of wineries are reporting their on-site retail and restaurant sales having declined. So people are still consuming, but they're consuming less, and that is having an impact on the Ontario wine industry and the wine industry across Canada in general. Looking ahead, when we ask some questions in terms of what do you foresee over the next 4 or 5 months, and this is before the second wave hit, wineries were telling us that 60% will continue to face more employee layoffs. 57% will face bad debt from restaurants and bars who are closing down or can't afford to pay their bills. 25% anticipate that their wineries will close at least temporarily. And 1 in 10 wineries in Ontario believe that they will close permanently. So recession-proof, I'd say probably not. But the impact of the pandemic is definitely having significant impacts on the wine industry and therefore on the Niagara region as a whole.
Okay, thank you for that answer. Those are very sobering statistics, and I would say that we're seeing so much more data being shared by businesses now. Industries are opening up completely and sharing information on how their businesses are faring year over year. But Dottie, I'd like to say to you that we've heard from Pierre about the international situation, and I think it's safe to say that there's such a great deal of scrutiny right now on all countries on how they've handled the pandemic so far. It seems in the US, at both state and federal government levels, they emphasize keeping your economy open rather than focusing, number one, on public health. Is that correct? And was that approach successful? Did the U.S. economy fare better than Canadian with our stricter health measures?
Well, I don't think there is one answer to that question. I mean, I think it depends on what region you're in. You know, as the United States of America, there is no federal overwhelming guidance on how the economy was going to reopen. So in New York, for example, where we were able to sort of control the spread to some degree and bend the curve, looks very different than it does right now, for example, in South Dakota and in Utah, places that were untouched in the first wave. So there is no one answer, I think, and I don't believe that the United States response is, even within our own borders, there are people who feel very strongly that the U.S. has done it the wrong way, and there are people who feel very strongly the U.S. has done it the right way. And these are our own citizens. And I represent our regional chamber. We've got CEOs from every industry in town, 70 or so CEOs, and even within that group, you see differences in perspective about how quickly should we reopen and should we be locking things down. So, I think like our election results show, the country here is very, very divided, and depending on who you ask, you'll get whatever answer you think you'd get.
Are you anticipating a change in the approach after the inauguration?
I'm hoping that there will be some national guidance around mask wearing and really getting back to science. I find it troubling, really, that there, even with the level of deaths that we've had in the U.S., which outpace pretty much every other country on the planet, that people are downplaying. Some people are downplaying the how devastating this is. But the economy, the economic disruption in our economy. I mean, I can't. Yeah, it's what you're hearing is happening in the wine industry in Canada, is happening here in many industries, tourism being among them, that really, really hurt. And I will tell you, we've spent a long time, Mishka and I and Keenan Loomis in Hamilton, to really reduce the impact of the border and to really try to take advantage of our integrated economy. And this is just a devastating blow. So Pierre's comments about globalization versus nationalization, I mean, I really think when you talk about the Niagara region, this is going to be an issue that really hits home for us, right? I mean, we've really tried to keep the borders open. We asked our members in our last membership survey, which we just conducted 2 months ago, how has I want to get the exact wording of the question, has the border closure negatively impact your business? And 35% of our members said it has. And what's interesting about that is trade is still open, right? So we're really talking about at ground level, and when you think about the number of Canadians, for example, who come to see hockey games and football games and shop and vice versa. I was telling the other panelists, normally this week of the year, I am in Niagara on the Lake. That's where I am every year at this time. So, it is disruptive on both sides. And I think Pierre's comments really are sobering in the sense that this isn't going to go away, even when we're able to reopen the border. And I think that's very troubling for both of our economic vitality, our regions.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Pierre, can I turn to you and ask about early in the pandemic, we saw some chronic shortage issues with regard to our supply chains of PPE, of course, and also some household goods. We're still seeing some supply chain problems now. What causes this, and how can we make those supply chains more resilient?
Well, what caused it really is that all of a sudden, everyone around the world was looking for the same goods. And I know we've been very critical in March, at the beginning, March, April, of the global supply chains. And we said, well, you see, the global supply chains don't work. I imagine that we had more capacity in every one of our country for PPEs. If everybody wants it at the same time, you would have had bottleneck at the national level, because we're producing far more of a particular product. We needed far more of the product that we ever produced. So I don't blame global supply chains for that kind of thing, because I think bottlenecks happened because of the demand. I think what we've learned in the pandemic, and I mean, Deloitte has worked very closely with ISED, our department, the Federal Department of Innovation, Science, and Economic Development, has really learned how to transform with the private sector, but a business into producing something else. Now we know how to do this within a few days, how you can get the textile industry to change the product and this and that. So we've learned that would not happen again. And in my view, you don't need a lot of localization or produce everything locally all the time, because you don't know what the next crisis will demand. Essentially, however, where we see more localization will be probably in pharmaceuticals. I think people beyond the pandemic, Canadians were amazed, flabbergasted to learn that 100% of the penicillin we consume in Canada, it comes from China. I mean, we discovered penicillin. We invented penicillin in Canada. We don't produce it anymore. So I think you will see a number of elements of that sort. But by and large, I think that the global supply chains have resisted relatively well, and that localization would not have been the answer to the goods that we missed. But at least now we know how to readjust our production relatively quickly within our own country.
Thank you. That's an interesting observation that through this pandemic, although we're all anxious to get back to what we consider to be normal, maybe there are certain things we don't need to go back to. Maybe we have learned new ways to shop, new ways to effect trade, to travel and do business. So we have to see if we can find something useful within all of this destruction. Anthony, we would say that the tourism sector has probably been the most disruptive of any. What sort of changes have businesses in tourism had to make? And do you think that any of those changes could continue to be useful when we see an end to this pandemic?
Well, certainly it has been the most disrupted, simply because access to markets is critical to tourism. So in the event that we need to learn to accept the fact that traveling in large groups, whether it be by air or by train, are going to be something that's going to be significantly impacted. And in as it relates to tourism and as it relates to Niagara, we've had to learn to overcome that. We've had to learn how to deal and really break down those experiences in terms of being able to accept consumers in smaller groups and being able to organize and coordinate in different manners. So the product offering has changed significantly. The way we buy it has changed significantly. The way we consume it has changed significantly. So of those components, there has been some uptick, as Dan pointed out, when you talk about wine delivery. That was a market that, quite frankly, we could have spent a fortune in terms of trying to bring awareness to do more door-to-door sales, but the pandemic forced people to do it. So now it's a behavior that I believe isn't going to go away. I believe those kinds of purchases will continue to be prominent in the market. Same with perhaps takeout or made to deliver pre-made meals. It's amazing how restaurants, how quickly they transformed to now, instead of sit-down dining, to provide for family planning on meals and basically bundling ingredients so people can cook at home. So I'm not suggesting that that's going to benefit tourism. It's just that those are behaviors that have occurred. As it relates to tourism, we do have to make some adjustments. And primarily, I think one of the biggest is going to be government. Government has been a very big role in this and how it's going to adjust and perhaps I don't have the answer to this, but how government is going to pull back a little bit to deal with issues that face the industry, liquidity issues, taxes, labor, insurance, all major issues that have come up as a result of the pandemic that we're going to look to government in the short term for those responses, but then there's going to have to be some adjustment in terms of how those roles adjust. I think from the private sector perspective, as it relates to how these disruptions have occurred and what will continue, I think those adjustments, that ability to stay open and still be successful with this constant changing of environments from yellow, orange, gray, red, these conditions have created a hypersensitivity on awareness and what's available. So the communication methods in which how we communicate and how we transmit information for tourism will also be impacted. And I think some of those will stick as well. And I think one of the things that I think we should all be aware of is the attention seekers. Attention seekers continue to rise in crisis. And I think there's a lot of people out there that continue to bring drama to scenarios on all sides of it that are going to continue to stay with us. And I think that's something that people need to be aware of in terms of how we manage the drama attached to a lot of these conditions and the attention seekers that are out there, so that we can, I guess, row that boat in the same direction and be aligned with our partners in this marketplace.
Okay, thank you very much. Dan, if we turn now to the wine industry within the tourism sector, many people may think of wine as just the bottles at the LCBO, but we're all well aware that many of the wineries earn a great portion of their revenue from visits, tastings, special events. Can you speak about how those events have been impacted by this pandemic, and also perhaps speak to some practices that have been introduced to address them?
Absolutely. I think one of the first things that we did when the pandemic was becoming a reality was we engaged discussions with governments across Canada, given that we largely have a monopoly system for alcohol sales across the country, to ensure that liquor retail would remain an essential service and remain open throughout the pandemic, and largely we were successful on that front. But I think you have to recognize that for small craft wineries, 85% of the wine sales take place at the winery. Somebody has to walk down the gravel road or drive down the gravel road and try the wine and hopefully enjoy it and purchase it. The other 15% is at bars and restaurants. So at the very beginning of the pandemic, cellar doors were closed, bars and restaurants were closed. Really, the only option left available was direct-to-consumer delivery, as I mentioned. But tourism was critical as those wineries were able to let in limited guests one more time. When we bring in 4 million tourists into our wineries every year, that brings in roughly $1.5 billion to the Canadian economy. And that's grown by 140% since 2006. That happens to be the year that I started in this organization, so that's kind of my baseline. It has nothing to do with me, but that's significant growth. And if you think of 4 million tourists per year, that's equivalent to the number of people that visited the Winter Olympics in Vancouver back several years ago. It's a really big number, and for Ontario would represent 60% of that. Of that number. So the impact when you lose 96% of your international tourists and somewhere in the range of 60% of your domestic tourists has a significant impact on every single winery in Canada, but largely on the smallest that need the most help. What have we done? I mean, the industry has been unique. Obviously, they've had to find unique ways to attract people into their wineries. So they've made serious investments in PPEs. They want to make sure that people feel comfortable. We obviously have vineyards, so we're able to open up our vineyards at least in the summer and spring to bring people through the door and still give them the experience that they're looking for, uplifted with food pairings or what have you. I mean, outdoor seating, heaters, in New York and Geneva, I've been in outdoor clear igloos. Wineries have brought those in to keep people comfortable in our climate and keep them warm. So there's been a great deal done. Curbside pickups on direct delivery as well. This has been a huge new business opportunity for the industry to attract tourists in and hopefully maintain that loyalty to your brand. But I guess the key thing here is that the pandemic has, in my view, made Canadians more receptive to go local. Mm-hmm. They've given them that, we should be purchasing more local agricultural products. Maybe we should be giving Canadian wines a chance rather than importing wines. I mean, statistic being that a bottle of VQA wine sold in Canada contributes $90 to the Canadian economy. A bottle of import contributes $15. This is good for the economy. And Canadians, I think, are grasping that, and they want more local. Unfortunately, our wines are not sold in liquor boards across the country. I mean, 8 of 10 provinces sell less than 5% market share for our premium Canadian wines, providing a great opportunity for imports. And our only chance to get our products in front of these consumers and the pandemic's opportunity with Go Local is to remove interprovincial barriers to trade. And that is a significant issue for the tourism industry, for wine country tourism, because Canadians love our wines when they come and visit Ontario, BC, or Nova Scotia or Quebec wineries, but then they can't get them when they get home. And all that marketing and promotional activity that we've done, that one-time tourist that comes in can never access our products again. So it's an issue. I think we're learning from direct delivery within provincial borders. Now we have to expand that and take it out of political hands and make it an economic stimulus package to remove interprovincial barriers to trade to allow growth within the Canadian economy.
Great. That's a great answer. Thank you very much. Dottie, can I ask you, with regard to the United States, as a wealthy country, you've been definitely, from the entire world, you've been the hardest hit of any economy, that's for certain. But perhaps what you've experienced in the U.S., they're just exaggerations of the trends we're seeing in other countries, like what Dan spoke of just now about our interprovincial barriers. Are there any fault lines that you've observed in the U.S. economy? And what do you think has to change to move you out of this and forward?
Well, I would just say we're seeing the same things in the U.S. as you're seeing in Canada. I mean, just to go on what Dan was talking about, we don't have nearly the sort of value proposition that the Canadian wineries do. But one of our board members, for example, is in the beer distribution business in Western New York, and 40% of his retail customers never reopened after the pandemic hit. So, we are seeing, we did a survey, a Western New York survey. And again, I'm not an expert on the national economy, but I think I'm a little bit of an expert on the local economy. We did a Western New York business impact survey after the first federal stimulus package was announced to really figure out where were the gaps for support. And 94% of regional businesses expected a steep decline in revenue at that time. And what we learned when we did that survey, and came out to be absolutely true, is that Main Street businesses and restaurants and tourism were going to be, the hardest hit. And so we have, for example, a big buy local effort going on here in Western New York and in the states overall. So I don't think it's exaggerated what you're seeing. A pleasant surprise has been that mid-sized businesses like manufacturing and a few others have actually done really well. They had a sort of a disruption in the supply chain that got fixed, and now many of them are actually going to make their numbers for 2020. So there's been some bright spots there, but what we need is a more coordinated approach to get COVID under control in our country. I mean, it's just it's just startling, the growth rate here, and we're breaking our own terrible record. So that to me is the biggest economic scare is closures again. And the disruption, it's one thing when we had to shut the economy down and we've slowly reopened the economy, but now these next set of shutdowns will be the death knell for a lot of businesses in our region and around the country. So this balance between the economic recovery and public health is a delicate one, and quite honestly, I think we need to come down more on the public health side in order to actually so we can stay open, so that we can begin recovery. I mean, that's really where I see it.
Great, thank you. That's interesting because really this pandemic seemed to take the world by surprise, but it probably shouldn't have. And we've been warned for decades of a pandemic approaching, and we had foreknowledge of this particular one no later than January this year. So perhaps one thing we should learn from all of this is we need to do a better job planning for contingencies and remember that a pandemic isn't the only threat to our economy and our society. We have to start by being aware of the threats in front of all of us. And I'd like to ask each of you to tell us of a major threat that you see to our economy or to your sector that isn't getting the attention that you believe it should at the moment. And Pierre, can we start with you, please, just in general?
It's the re-engagement of citizens that is the biggest threat. I think that by and large, the economy, is under pause. It was relatively healthy. It is learning a certain number of new methodology, new ways of working. But I think that the major threat at this time is regaining the confidence of the consumers. And beyond the sanitary risk, it is also about how individuals will come to manage their purse, manage their budgets. There will be a lot of deep soul searching on how people want to protect themselves in the future as well. And as I say, beyond the sanitary, I'm talking about, I look at a lot of personal choices that have been made in this period of confinement and lockdown. So the biggest challenge will be to readjust the economy to how we will have changed as individuals.
Thank you. Anthony, can you comment on the same question, please?
I can. And I'll be honest with you. I don't know that there's one single biggest threat because I think there's a lot of them. So I don't want to underscore the fact that there's many of them out there. But I think, as we talk about confidence and community acceptance, I think that ability to have people come back into jurisdictions that are known for tourism and welcome tourists from other jurisdictions that have been affected by COVID, whether it's international jurisdictions or areas that have been affected more dramatically, and allowing them to come back and welcome them back in the manner that we've been accustomed to. I think the psychological component, when you talk about financial impacts and the depletion of reserves and liquidity, whether it be personal or business, those have been significant. And when you talk about disposable income, usually what's affected first and foremost is luxury items and luxury purchases. And I think, the narrative around tourism maybe and move to that this is almost a little bit of mental wellness or therapy, that you need to travel and get out again and recharge or reinvigorate yourself in going to some of these jurisdictions. So I think Niagara's positioned well for that urban escapism, so to speak. People are fatigued with COVID. People want to get out. People want to share times and spend times. And again, I think that turns into the opportunity that really rises out of the biggest threat, which is disposable income. So I think confidence, consumer or community acceptance, and the fact that this narrative around how really travel and coming to a jurisdiction like Niagara may be therapeutic in terms of people's wellness and getting them back to normal.
Okay, thank you very much. Over to Dottie, please.
There we go. Sorry about that.
Okay.
I think nationally, the biggest threat I see is really the division in our country, which Pierre touched on, the number of votes that Trump got and the number of votes Biden got, how highly engaged electorate, but very divided country. And there's a lot of disinformation and misinformation that unfortunately people on either camp will believe. And I think that's a threat to recovery completely. That respect for science and really understanding what truth really is. So as a human being, I worry about that and its impact on the economy. Locally, I think the bridge the closure and the dividing line between our countries is not good for either side, for our economic future. And Anthony, to your point, I think people will for some time stay closer to home as they travel or places that are more familiar. And when we think about Canadians coming to the U.S. and vice versa, there's a lost opportunity there in the market that exists, and certainly where Greater Niagara is positioned between Toronto and Buffalo. That's an opportunity and a threat, right? And the longer the bridge stays closed, in terms of our economic recovery.
Thank you. Dan, can you highlight any threat to your economy and your sector going forward?
Sure. I mean, beyond COVID, which I just said in Ontario is, 1 in 10 wineries are at risk of permanently closing. The biggest threat that's facing the Canadian wine industry from coast to coast right now is the fact that we will have to pay excise tax very shortly. We are a value-added agricultural product. We are the only agricultural product in Canada that pays an excise duty, and our excise duty is amongst the highest in the world. It's 66.5 cents per liter in Canada, compared to 0 in Italy, 2 cents in France, and after tax rebates around 2 cents in the United States. So as a result of a negotiated settlement with Australia a few months ago, we are going to lose our excise exemption in the next 18 months. That's going to add $6 a case to a bottle of wine, and I foresee hundreds of wineries closing and thousands of jobs being lost in this country. It will put the wine industry back 30 years unless the government's able to find a replacement program and implement that in the next federal budget. I mean, the banks are already coming to our door because our tanks are full. We haven't sold everything from the last vintage, and we got a great vintage coming up. But you double that with the loss of 50 cents a bottle, $6 a case, and this industry is in desperate problems. And we're hopeful that the federal government will fix that issue over the course of the next few weeks and months. But if they don't, it's a death knell for the industry.
Okay, thank you. So Dan has just highlighted for us some additional help that could come from our governments. We've seen since March many programs that have been introduced to help, and there have been it has been a lot of help to our local businesses, to the area, to the various sectors, but there have been identified gaps. Can I ask Dan, sorry, we just heard from Dan, can I hear from Anthony? What new programs or changes to the current programs do you feel the government could make that would help us?
I think that's a great question, Janice, and quite frankly, if I had the answer, I think governments would be doing it. I think right now, when we look at the penetration that COVID has had on the population in Canada, we're still just approaching 1% of the country that's been affected with the virus. Yet, when we look at the response in terms of how it's been managed, we should really be congratulating government in terms of keeping it to those numbers. But what they haven't really done a great job in, and I think this is kind of where the opportunity lies, is how they've deployed the recovery dollars in areas where they were trying to affect as many people in a short period of time, but you can clearly see where the gaps are. And I think, to your point, government has to take a little bit of a different role as it looks at the components that I talked about before. Liquidity, as everybody is related to, has really been exhausted. Reserves within companies have been depleted. Taxes, whether it be excise, real estate, income, are all part of the equation that government needs in order to fund this redistribution strategy. So the tax issue, which government really hasn't addressed in a material way, has to be addressed. How it looks at labor and in the insurance markets are going to be pretty significant as well in terms of how government pursues. But I think, as it tends to deploy resources so that it can prime the pumps of the economy to keep it rolling, there are significant strategic gaps in terms of how it's being deployed. And I think the biggest one is really going to lie in its inability to generate any type of level of liquidity. Without liquidity, you stifle investment. Without investment, you're not going to get the economic velocity necessary in order to create the recovery they're looking for. So I think those are the components that I think they need to focus in on. Primary liquidity and taxes as to how it's going to affect business and personally, and that the distribution methods, I think, have significant challenges within government.
Thank you very much. Dottie, in your government, do you see gaps in the programs that have been provided for businesses?
Well, actually, what got done, what was called the PPP program here, which is really to keep people on your payroll, and that would be a forgivable loan, was really successful in terms of deploying money quickly. I mean, it had some issues with it. For example, chambers of commerce and professional associations were disqualified from applying for it. But the real issue now is we need another stimulus package because things are not under control. Mm-hmm. So I think what the government did do was good, but we had all anticipated that there would be some relief before the end of the year, and now we know we won't get it. And so how many businesses will close between now and then? And I think we're really in this situation with the increasing lockdowns that we see that more businesses will close, and it will be terribly unfortunate.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Pierre, you have a unique insight with your great experience within our government. What would your comment be regarding government programming?
Well, I'm learning a great deal. I must tell you, I'm very grateful to my panelists, my co-panelists, Dottie, Dan, and Anthony, because I'm learning a great deal this morning, and I feel that I'll have more intelligent conversations with my friends in the government there. I think that in Canada we have received a great deal more help in terms of the programs. Our parliamentary democracy has served us well, and there has been a consensus in Canada so far. Where I believe the government needs to begin thinking a great deal, and I know they are. We've got to really begin to address the recovery plans, and private sector should make it clear, its arguments quite clear at this time. I do believe that the government will want to go very much on a growth agenda, as I was saying. So any idea you have for helping companies on the recovery, the minute it will be possible, that's where the government will be. I know they don't want to increase taxes for the next few years for all kinds of obvious reasons. Hopefully they can even eliminate some taxes like the excise one on wine, but it is really time to set our minds on the recovery programs and the kind of recovery we want. We've heard the Prime Minister talk about building back better when he signed the agreement with Boris Johnson on the Brexit and CETA, Canada-European Union Agreement post-Brexit. With UK, they talked about building back greener. But it will be very important. I mean, the government is setting its mind, is moving already towards the recovery phase now.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We've had some input through the chat line on the Zoom, or the live stream, I'm sorry. And one of the questions that we've received from the audience is, what specific research can anyone share that supports the notion that Niagara tourism is going to rebound? And secondarily, over what period of time do you see it taking to return to what we all refer to as normal? I'd like to take that question on first. Anyone have specific research they can point to that that indicates that with the rebound is in our future? Anthony?
I'll jump in, Janice. I will jump in with some anecdotal research. We've done some analysis here in Niagara that points to some very interesting, I'll call them anomalies for now, because we've all been impacted by COVID in a pretty dramatic sense. But when I look at September, for example, the month of September on the accommodation sector, or visitation for overnights, not necessarily just day trips, but on overnights, we've got some data that suggests that the numbers for this September are pretty comparable to last September as it relates to the jurisdictions that we can service. So certainly you have to take out the US markets, but when you look at year over year of what Ontario overnights were almost identical to the year prior. When we look at Quebec as a visitation into Niagara for the month of September, its numbers were actually up year over year. So we've got some interesting data that looks at the fact that the jurisdictions we're able to service are actually performing at pre-COVID levels or above right now. Now, quite frankly, until the borders open up and the international markets open up, and we don't know really what the impact is going to be to the airline industry, because that's what we're so dependent on when it comes to lift out of international jurisdictions. And in the absence of air travel to our jurisdictions or to Ontario, we're going to be dramatically affected. So I don't see a short horizon for that recovery. But I do see, as Dottie pointed out, when and if that vaccine comes out and people have the confidence to open that border again, I think you're going to see a pretty robust response to the marketplace. So those are the indicators that I can point to. And I said they're not necessarily long-term, because we don't have the benefit of a lot of information. We just have really a little bit of snapshots of data. And September was an interesting component to look at. Now, as we look back as the second wave is occurring and what that might be, it's very hard to predict when and if that recovery will occur, and as to whether or not we'll get that same effect once we come out of the second wave.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other panelists wish to address that question? Regarding research, what gives us that confidence to know that we're going to come out of this, we're going to be strong again? And would anyone like to comment perhaps on what marketing might look like in the future? Has our experience through the pandemic changed public perception of what matters, priorities in people's lives? Is our marketing going to change to reflect any of that?
I'll take this one. Yeah, look, I think, and some of the panelists made this point. Our habits have all been significantly disrupted, and we found ways to do things that in ways we hadn't done before, and many of those things are going to stick. So I think when it comes to marketing, I think that we're going to see the impact of the pandemic for a long time, and emphasis on safe places and all of that. But I think we really have to think about what does the future look like when people start moving around again. And I think, I personally feel that there is going to be pent-up demand for travel, but that initial wave is going to be as close to home as possible, right? I think it's going to be a long time. I think international travel is going to be challenged for many, many years to come. But I just want to capitalize on the fact that I think this is an opportunity for this region when we talk about the number of people, not only in Buffalo, but really through the Mid-Atlantic up through Toronto. That is, the buying power of that corridor is tremendous. So when we talk about marketing, I think, the minute the border is open, we really have to really work together to make sure that we can keep as much of those travel revenues in our regions where we can all benefit most. So that's what I hope happens. I don't know if that's what will happen, but that's what I hope happens.
Okay, that's good planning. I know we, throughout the entire region here, I'm very aware of the investments that owners have made in PPE, new protocols, new staff training processes. There's been great emphasis on that, on making sure that all of our businesses are delivering safe experiences. So I think we're ready, we're prepared, and we just have to, be ready to welcome people back when the time is right. Encouraging. Dan, do you have anything you want to add on that, on the future?
Well, just to build off what Dottie said, as the wine industry, supports free trade agreements, we are looking to expand our export markets. I think everybody would agree this is a challenging time to sell wine in other countries. They're facing the same economic challenges that we are. But also, our exports represent 1% of production. We are going to be going into a phase where all major wine producing countries are going to be looking at one of the most attractive nations in the world to sell wine, which is Canada. And due to the free trade agreements, 92% of wine imports are now entering tariff free. and that will grow to 98% once we sign Mercosur. So I think it's very important for all governments across Canada to understand that challenge and to take a look at providing us with more shelf space in their stores, addressing the tax issues, right? I mean, we have a legislated inflation indexation of our excise duty in federal law. It was the only tax that went up during COVID on April 1st, and it's going to go up on April 1st again. That should be scrapped so that we can compete. And we need to have more domestic marketing and promotion so that we can take advantage of our own marketplace. We're only exporting 1%. We want to grow, but most countries own their home market before they start to export. Spain owns 99% of their market. The US owns 70% of their market. We have a 12% market share for our premium wines in Canada. So I think there's an opportunity here to build on Go Local and take advantage of this minor opportunity that the pandemic has provided us, and use that to put in place some good policies, measures, tax measures that will support the growth of the wine industry at home, and then allow us to rebound into export markets when time permits. But it's going to take time. I don't foresee our precious Chinese tourists coming back to buy ice wine for a few more years yet.
Wow. So we all do agree, though, that there are tremendous opportunities moving forward, that we're well positioned as Canadians and Americans, our close market. And we always talk about the Niagara River not like a barrier or with bridges. It's almost like crossing the street. We're just going across the road. It's the other side of the street. So we all together, we have great opportunities. The word unprecedented, I said back, I think it was in April. I'm never using that word again because it's become so overused. These are unprecedented times, but they are. And I'd like perhaps to put this question over to Pierre just before we wrap up this morning. Has there ever been any other time in our economy that you would see something that's been this challenging for the country?
No, honestly, no. I mean, of my lifetime, this is the most challenging situation that we have had. I find it, since the Second World War, this has been the most challenging situation because it affects so many individuals in so many ways, in so many business, and not only in our own country. So this is by far the most important situation. But what I've very much enjoyed of our conversation this morning is that we have identified opportunities. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we set in our ways. We had taken all kinds of ways and they were serving us well for many decades. This has forced us to think out of the box. And I do believe that every seismic event, such as a crisis like this, will make us think differently at a lot of things individually and as far as our companies is concerned. And I was very glad to hear from Dottie, Dan, and Anthony this morning and from you to your questions, all kinds of venues that can be innovative, creative, and get us out of our ways. It's sometimes we get too comfortable. I mean, right now it's tough, but I do honestly believe that in a couple of years' time, we will realize all of the improvements and innovations that we will have invented.
Yeah, that's terrific. Thank you. I would like to thank every one of the panelists. You've all brought a unique approach and a unique perspective on your own sectors and the challenges that we're facing in the economy today. As I said at the beginning, coming into this facility at White Oaks, you really get the sense that everybody is on the same page. Everybody is conscious of public health above all else. And then coming into this studio that they've set up here, you feel the attention that the Chamber has put into making sure that their messages are being delivered professionally. So I'd like to thank each one of you for your experience, your wisdom, and your willingness to take the time out of your schedules to share with everyone. Thank you so very much. So I'm now going to turn over to Mishka and thank Mishka for the opportunity for all of us to participate in this wonderful economic summit. Thank you.
This concludes the final part of our three-part series. I wanted to thank our moderator and panelists for approaching today's discussion with substance and insight, a real treat of a dialogue that opens our minds to the forces that will shape our recovery. Our thanks go to Janice Thompson, our moderator, the Honorable Pierre Pettigrew, Dan Paskowski, Anthony Nunziata, and Dottie Gallagher. This dialogue was made possible because of our amazing partners that are standing by our side. Niagara Region Economic Development, Goodman School of Business, Brock University, Niagara College, DDL and Company, RBC, Deloitte, BDC, Niagara Workforce Planning Board, Pegasus Aviation, Easy Rock 105.7, and Newstalk 610 CKTB. Thank you for all that you do for the community. And to all attendees, thank you for being part of not only today's sessions, but many of you who have joined us over the past 3 weeks. Thank you.